hybrid meeting of the Environment, Regeneration and Street Scene Services Scrutiny Committee on the 3rd of March 2023. I'm Councillor Sean Percy and I'll be chairing this meeting this morning. As usual, please make sure your phones are on silent during the meeting, and when you wish to speak, please raise your hand in the chamber or your electronic hand on Teams. And also please remember to mute your mics when you're not speaking. For the purposes of declarations today, I would just like to confirm that we'll be scrutinising items 7, 8, 17 and 21 on the Cabinet Board papers. So I'll now move on to agenda item 2, declarations of interest. Are there any declarations from members? I can't see any declarations.
I don't see any, Chair, either.
Thank you. As usual, members, if you do need to make a declaration during the meeting, just raise your hand and we can deal with it on the item. So I'll now move on to agenda item 3, which is minutes of the previous meeting. So they are on pages 5 to 8 of your agenda pack. Can I have a proposer and a seconder to approve those minutes, please?
I propose, Chair.
I'll like a second if you want to show.
Thank you. Is that Councillor Tim Bowen and Councillor Andrew Dacey? So thank you. So I'll now move on to agenda item 4 on the scrutiny papers, which is to consider the recommendations of the Task and Finish group on the waste strategy review. So this report is included as a supplement to the papers. So if members do wish to look at the report as we go through this now, you'll need to open the supplementary papers. So as members will know, we met last Friday to discuss potential amendments and additions to the waste strategy report. And I'd like to thank members and officers for their time last Friday, which was quite an intense 3-hour session as we went through all the recommendations in quite some detail. So the report that's published today with our papers has a number of suggestions which arose from that meeting. So today we're asking members of the committee to formally endorse the report and commend it to Cabinet Board. And also you'll see the recommendations on page 5 of the supplement papers. Also include to extend an invitation to the Cabinet member to return to the committee at the next meeting to report back on whether those suggestions have been taken forward.
Chair, if I can just come in at that point, if that's okay, just in terms of the recommendation on the covering report, there's just a slight error on the Cabinet member's portfolio. It's supposed to read Cabinet member for Street Scene, not Cabinet member for Street Scene and neighbourhood services. So just bear that in mind.
Okay, thank you. So the recommendations, as I said, listed on page 5 of the supplement papers. Could I have a proposer and a seconder for those recommendations, please?
I'll propose, Chair.
And I'll second, Chair.
Okay, Councillor Grimshaw proposed, and I think we've got a number of options for a second. We've got that. Okay, could if members wish to abstain, could you please raise your electronic hands or hands now, please?
I don't see any abstentions, Chair.
And again, if members wish to if members do not indicate to the contrary, then I'll take this decision as supported the Cabinet. So if any members wish to vote against, please raise your hands now.
I don't see any, Chair, so that recommendation has been supported to Cabinet.
Excellent.
Well, not supported to Cabinet, but you know what I mean, the report has been commended. Apologies for my wording.
Thanks. So we'll move on now to agenda item 5, which is pre-decision scrutiny. So we'll move over to the Cabinet papers. So we'll be starting with agenda item 7, which is the Highways and Engineering Works Programme. The only thing I wish to make comment as chair on this one, just to reflect the discussion we had in our pre-briefing, which is to request a report from officers to come back on our 26th of May meeting, just detailing the criteria used to assess and prioritise the schemes in the Highways and Engineering Works Programme, which is in front of us today. So I'd just like to make that request to officers, and I don't know whether officers wish to make any comment on that now. Just might just indicated that.
Yeah, no, that's fine if that's what members would like.
Okay, can I just can I just ask for a proposal in a second? Are the members happy with that way forward?
Propose, Chair.
Thank you.
I'll second them.
Thanks, Councillor Grimshaw. We're all a little bit slow this morning. Okay, so that report then will be tabled in for the meeting for the 26th of May, and we can scrutinise that in a bit more detail then. Now, I've had no further indications for questions on the Highways and Engineering Works Programme, so I'll move on to agenda item. Actually, bear with me a sec. Do we need to go through the? Yeah. Apologies, members. As we are technically scrutinising the item, I do need to propose in a second for the Works Programme as well. So the recommendations are on page 15 of the Cabinet Agenda Pack. Could I have a proposal and seconder for those recommendations, please?
Yeah, I propose, Chair.
Councillor Tim Bowen, and a seconder, please.
Na i eilio, diolch.
Councillor Rosalind Davis, thank you. If any members wish to abstain, could you please indicate now?
I don't see any abstention.
So members, if you do not indicate to the contrary, then I will take it this decision is supported to Cabinet.
I can confirm that decision has been supported to Cabinet.
Thank you. So we'll now move on to agenda item 8, which is the Vehicle and Heavy Plant Fleet Procurement Programme, which is on pages 27 to 42 of the Cabinet Board papers. So members, I've got some indications in advance for questions on this item. So my first indication is Councillor Cathy James.
Thanks, Chair. Right, obviously this is a hefty piece of work, and I fully agree with the fact that it has to take place and it's in line with our policy and everything. I also understand that at this stage it's difficult, if not impossible, to say how much this is all going to cost. But I think it would be useful if at some point during the process, when costs become apparent, we could have a report back to us with some figures attached to it, because obviously this is going to be a rolling programme, so it will be useful to get an idea of how much we're committed to going forward. My second question is around the charging infrastructure, because obviously more electric vehicles will need more charging infrastructure, so I just wondered where we were with that. And the third question, the recycling lorries, where you've got everything itemised, they all have possible electric replacement next to them, and I just wanted to know if that was a matter of cost or availability or a bit of both. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Cathy. I'm not sure which officer is going to respond to this.
Okay, thank you,
Dave,
Chair. If I can respond to the questions, and I do have the fleet manager with me as well, so I may call upon him to help me out. Certainly, in terms of the cost report, we can bring a sort of cost report back for members' information. You'll appreciate that the current market is very volatile at the moment. Moreover, for the large vehicles, the HGVs in particular, we are having to wait almost up to a year to receive delivery of some of these vehicles as well. And during that period, there can be quite significant changes in the market. So obviously, cost is affected by the overall economic picture and supply and demand. But yeah, there's no problem. We can certainly bring a cost report back, perhaps at well, I need to bring Kevin in, but probably half year. But as I say, it would be very much dependent upon us going through the detailed specification now of those vehicles, seeking the tenders, and then we'll be able to report on the cost received. So that'll hopefully answer your first point. In terms of charging infrastructure, we've had some limited charging infrastructure installed across our civic buildings. But at present, we're on site at the moment at the Keys and Service Response Centre, and in readiness for expanding the low carbon vehicles within the fleet. We've got a £1.6 million contract that's just started on site. That's due for completion by the end of the summer. We obviously have some charging facilities down there and at Tregellis Court as well, in the interim, but that project will predominantly deal with the small and medium vans and our sort of council fleet of pool vehicles. And we are further putting in some EV charging infrastructure. Currently, we're actually assessing that at the present for Tregellis Court in the interim, because we have some new electric buses that are about to be delivered for the community transport service. And there are also 6 social services cars that are due to be delivered. And I think we've got some waste vehicles that are, no, building services vehicles, I think, isn't it, Kevin, that are imminently
Yeah, that's great.
due to arrive with us in the next week. So we've got a plan in place at the Service Response Centre. And then my colleague Mike Roberts is also at the Waste and Recycling Centre, carrying out a feasibility for the introduction of EV charging infrastructure there as well, so that as we migrate elements of the fleet from Tregellis Court and the Keys over, so that they're permanently based at the recycling centre, that there'll be sufficient infrastructure there for those vehicles as well. Linked with the infrastructure, we're also putting in backup battery supplies, and also we will be having solar panels and solar arrays on the building at the recycling centre, but also in actual canopies at the Service Response Centre. So we're fairly well advanced in that respect, but there is clearly an awful lot more work that's required. And one of the challenges that we face, Councillor James, is the actual load and capacity supplies to our buildings as well. And my colleagues in property are currently working with the likes of Western Power and the supply companies to ensure that we've got sufficient electricity load and capacity as we expand the fleet now over the next sort of 5-7 years to 2030. So that piece of work is already sort of in trail, coupled with the infrastructure and the fleet more generally. We've been tasked to do a transport review, which will be starting this coming financial year, and that's with a view to coming up with a 5-year plan of how we will review services, use data to advise on how we will develop and expand the fleet going forward, but also to assess if we can do the services in a more efficient way, with a view to taking cost out of the fleet to reinvest in the capital costs for the purchase of the vehicles. In terms of the recycling lorries, the third point that you raised, at the moment, obviously, Mike Roberts has got his waste review and strategy being taken forward. We believe the recycling lorries are most likely to be electric, but some of the refuse freighters, we think that it would be more beneficial that they are put further back in the procurement programme for fleet while the hydrogen infrastructure and development of hydrogen charge facilities becomes more developed and readily available, along with the hydrogen trucks. And we think that that would probably be the better option for the freighters. But again, this is evolving. We're always reviewing the market and the availability of these vehicles coming forward. So I don't know, Kevin, if you want to add anything, or indeed if my colleagues on the committee meeting this morning, Mike Roberts, would like to add anything further in terms of specifically around the waste recycling vehicles. So if I could ask Kevin to comment.
Yeah, if I bring in Kevin, and then Mike's going to come in the chamber as well.
Yeah, thanks, Dave. Yeah, just to echo some of Dave's comments, but there, from a fleet perspective at the moment, it's really difficult. The market is really volatile, as Dave said. Costs are, rising up, and availability is a challenge at the moment. We do have one recycling vehicle, which was on last year's procurement program, that we've ordered and is due in before the end of this financial year. So that's going to be a good gauge for us then to get out on the rounds, ensure that the vehicle is, because it's fully electric as well, that it can do what it says on the tin, basically. And my colleagues, Mike and his waste team will put it through its paces on all the rounds to further look then to see whether it's fit. The electric curbside vehicles are fit then to roll out, and how much really that we want to replace with electric, or it may or may not be suitable, but it's a good starting point then for us to really evaluate the electric curbside vehicle before we fully invest in changing everything over to electric. And that's basically what I got to say. Okay.
Thank you, Kevin. I can bring in Mike Roberts now in the chamber. Mike.
Thank you, Chair. Myself and my colleague Dave Griffiths obviously work very closely together. He manages, his team manage the garage, and obviously my street care services use a lot of the vehicles. So we do work very closely together. We have a renewals fund that deals with most of the vehicles, and we do periodically look at the profile of the expenditure on that. And I think it's a very good idea, as the question was, that it's timely to review that now, because obviously there has been a spike in the cost of vehicles across the board for all sorts of reasons with supply and demand. In terms of charging infrastructure, Mr. Griffiths has mentioned the new infrastructure going in at the quays. In terms of the waste transfer station at Crumlin Burrows, the solar array has been installed there and will be energised later this month. We have a plan there for charging facilities for the entire waste fleet. There is a direct grid at the transfer station to a direct connection substation to the grid, which is sufficient to take the load for all the charging facilities. We have a plan to develop those facilities, and it's already in the programme that it's been agreed with members. We'll be relocating the collection fleet down there. We're currently working through some issues with the sustainable urban drainage systems and things that we have to do before we can actually finish that work, which will be undertaken later in the coming calendar year. And the question was about possible electric vehicles. Two issues. One is, do they work? And we believe we've identified one that does work and will be excellent for us. That is ordered, and it will be in this month. So we will see that will go live. It's nothing like having a vehicle in service full time to find out if there are any issues. And the second issue is that, the vehicle that we've got coming in was funded, including some Welsh Government financial support. So obviously Welsh Government is looking to see The waste fleets across Wales decarbonised by 2030, and they are providing a grant towards the difference in cost between the diesel and the electric vehicles. So obviously, if you're renewing 20 next year, obviously hoping Welsh Government can support a grant of towards 20 vehicles, but it may be if they can't do that, then we'll have to look at what's affordable. So do the vehicles work? And we've got one coming in, and the other side is, do we confirm the grant? So we flagged to Welsh Government early for their budgetary purposes that we've got the bulk of our recycling fleet coming through the system, and hopefully they will provide the grant which will meet the gap in the costs. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you, officers, for the detailed responses there. I'll just go back to Councillor Cathy James if she wants to respond. Cathy.
Yes, thanks everyone. That was a good amount of detail and very useful. I think, yes, it would be very useful to have a report in about 6 months' time with some costs attached once we have actually got an idea of what some of them are. I fully understand how impossible it is to predict them, though. I think it would be useful if at the same time we could also have a progress report on the charging infrastructure as well, so we can check that that is all continuing to plan. But yeah, that's useful and has answered my questions. Thank you.
Excellent, thanks. I'll move on now to my next indication, which is Councillor Stephanie Grimshaw. Steph.
Hi, thanks for this document. It's really encouraging to see that such time and kind of money essentially has been dedicated to the transition to renewable energies. One of the things I wanted to kind of point out and have a discussion around is the provision to purchase fossil fuel vehicles if they wanted to. We have obviously declared a climate emergency, and we don't want to. We want to make it kind of as hard as possible to choose fossil fuels over greener energy options. So I was just wondering, and I know other members want to speak on this as well. I was wondering whether we could have a discussion around that and whether we wanted to change that.
Thanks, Steph. I'll bring in my next indication, which is Councillor Nathan Goldup-John. Nathan.
Morning, everyone. Sorry, I've had a bit of a nightmare with my technology, so I haven't really heard everything up to date, but I managed to catch some of Cathy's and some of Dave's, Kevin's and Mike's responses, and what I've heard definitely welcome that news. But yeah, I would just like to re-emphasise Councillor Grimshaw's point that I am slightly uncomfortable and I do have concerns with just giving a broad brush of saying you could possibly purchase electrical vehicles, 20 of them, because it's such a large investment, one in the fleet, which will last for 10, 15 years, which then obviously wouldn't really align with our goals to achieving net zero vehicles with those associated zero emissions. So it was just around that specific point, and I think Councillor James touched on it, with having potential reports coming back within 6 months outlining those pros and cons, if you will, of purchasing those vehicles. And it's welcome news knowing that there's one coming in very soon, so you'll be able to actually have real life testing of that vehicle and see how it works in the field, as you've stated. But I think between Councillor James, Councillor Grimshaw and Councillor Percy, we have put up a proposed amendment just saying that I could read it out if you like. Councillor Percy, what would you like me to do? Because I think from what I've heard, everything has been kind of touched upon, so I don't necessarily know if I need to reiterate all of the same concerns.
Yeah, if members are still minded to put forward the amendment, then if you could read that out and propose it, Nathan, that'd be absolutely fine.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so just having due regard to the integrated impact assessment, it is recommended that 25, that members approve the purchase of zero emission vehicles in the proposed vehicle plant procurement programme for 23-24 set out in Appendix A. The delegated authority be granted to the head of service in consultation with Cabinet Member for Strategic Planning, Transport and Connectivity to purchase any zero emission vehicles in order to maximise the ability of grant funding that may become available to assist with the purchase of cost of the vehicles. and 27, that the purchase of fossil fuel powered vehicles included in Appendix A and any additional vehicles subject to further reports to Cabinet Board for approval, with the justification as to why zero emission alternatives is not available to be purchased. So yeah, just basically safeguarding the transition to electrical vehicles or zero carbon energy vehicles. Thanks, Chair, and everyone else.
Okay, thank you, Nathan. For everyone's information, that has been placed into the chat. So if officers or members do wish to read the text of that in some more detail or review it, is in the chat. And just to clarify, really, in terms of the amendment, it's slightly changing the wording in the first 2 points in the recommendation to limit the approval to zero emission vehicles only, and limit the delegate authority to zero emissions only. And then, as the amendment states, clarifying that for any fossil fuel vehicles, they should be subject to further reports. So we've got a proposer. Have we got a seconder for that amendment?
I'll second, Chair.
Okay, Councillor Lynch. So we'll now go to a vote then on that amendment. Oh, sorry, I thought I'd knocked my mic off then. We'll now go to a vote on that amendment. Do any members wish to abstain? Oh, sorry. Does I see Dave Griffiths wants to come in?
Yeah, the only thing I would say, Chair, is that there may be circumstances where a vehicle may not be readily available, and that, you know, if we've got alternatives where we can hire or do a short-term lease, but we don't want, you must understand that we don't want to find ourselves where we would jeopardize service delivery. And in those circumstances, we sometimes have to act much more quickly than going through a full reporting process. And by that, I mean, it could mean a home to school transport contract being affected, or a vehicle being off the road for a critical service. So I think we just need to be mindful of that. I suppose we could deal with it outside of the process via an urgency action in that respect, but we are building in a more administrative sort of duties within the procurement programme, which is already quite testing, really, in trying to deliver that scale of vehicle procurement. I agree that we should obviously, you know, we're supportive of bringing the cost report back, but importantly, at the same time, I think we should bring the feedback on the performance of that vehicle, and how well it functions in terms of the testing of those rounds. And that's why we've basically put possible, because until we know for sure that vehicle is going to be fit for purpose, we don't want to fully commit, I suppose, in placing an order for 20 vehicles at, let's say, 10 million quid, to find that they're not suitable. So we wouldn't normally bring a report that's got in brackets possible. It's very much on the basis of the testing of that vehicle. So we're happy to bring a report back specifically for those vehicles, but I think we need to have some flexibility in terms of maintaining service continuity as well. So that's all I wanted to add before members finalise that recommendation. I can see that the chair, that Kevin's got his hand raised as well.
Okay, thanks for that, Dave. I'll bring in some of the other officers and the cabinet member in a moment. And just for clarity, in terms of the wording of the proposed amendment, it relates to purchasing only, so it doesn't affect short-term hire of fossil fuel vehicles in terms of how that's worded. And I think the intention of this is to make it more onerous to purchase fossil fuel vehicles. That is the intention. So there is an additional layer of scrutiny on that. And again, we've had a proposal and seconder for the amendment, so we will be taking a vote on it after we've had the comments from the rest of the officers and the cabinet members. But this is only to recommend this position to the cabinet board at their next meeting. So if that is the position the committee wishes to take, it is then up for the cabinet member and the cabinet board to discuss it in their meeting later on, and maybe accept all or part of our recommendation. So I would just remind committee members of that as well, if we are minded to vote for this amendment, that it doesn't bind the cabinet member to follow the entire amendment if they so wish. So I will bring in.
Chair.
I've got. Sorry, Steph. Yeah.
I'm so sorry to kind of skip in. I do unfortunately have to leave very shortly. But what I've had a discussion, Nathan is having technical issues at the moment. I have had a chat to him and said we would be quite happy for the hiring of short-term vehicles to be delegated.
Yeah, it's not excluded in the current wording, so I'm not sure that's an issue. So that's fine. Okay, so I'll bring in now. I'll bring in Mike Roberts first because I can see.
Thank you. Just a point of information for members in taking the decision. Obviously, we as officers, we're all on board with the decarbonisation agenda, and the council has its decarbonisation and renewable energy strategy. So we're all on board with that, which is why we've got advanced plans for things like charging facilities, which are ongoing. Just to note that the vehicle that we've got coming in, the HGV recycling truck, that's benefiting from support of £170,000 from Welsh Government in terms of helping us with the additional cost. Obviously, you multiply that by 20, you're looking at over £3 million, which if that funding support wasn't available for Welsh Government, that would be that sort of scale of extra demand on the council's capital programme. So we all know the direction we're going, and I would just ask that we do have some flexibility in what we need to do. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. I'll bring in the cabinet member now, Councillor Scott Jones. Scott.
Thank you, Chair. It was only a quick one, really. Dave Griffiths has answered quite a bit by advocating, that some of the amendments could impact on purchasing as a result of going through formalities such as committees. So I'm just going to ask Mike, really, the other head of services, because obviously we've got to make that, we've got to take into account your recommendation, the amendments later on. And I just wanted officers to give me that advice in terms of from their perspective, like Dave has, if there's any implications that could be caused as a result of the amendments.
Yeah, no, that's fine. The only thing I was going to mention was obviously if you wanted that advice now, that's entirely up to the officers, or if you prefer to have that conversation in the cabinet board.
Yeah, I mean, it might be worthwhile Mike mentioning it now so that other scrutiny members can be aware of any concerns, of reasons, maybe, for example, why an amendment might not be approved later on.
Yeah, look, if officers wish to come in, I'm quite happy for that.
The only point I'd made is the point I just made about the zero or low emission vehicles are significantly more expensive, and if we don't benefit from the grant support from Welsh Government, there would be a significant cost impact at this time. So that's the only point I would make.
Okay, I'm just going to sort of round off the discussion. Just Councillor Grimshaw wish to come in.
Sorry, just a last point. It doesn't say in the appendix that one, sorry, let me start again. So if we're worried about the cost of the electric vehicles, then I feel like this kind of appendix and this move towards purchasing electric vehicles is more of kind of lip service, rather than if we're already kind of at the point where, oh, well, electric vehicles are more expensive. I don't think that should be a reason. That was all I wanted to say.
Okay. Thanks, Steph.
No, just to reassure the Scrutiny Committee, we're clearly aligned to the renewals programme. We had to get Welsh Government to actually approve the original zero emissions transition plan. It was a requirement of every local authority in Wales to put that plan before Welsh Government and get it approved, which set the scene. So as officers, we clearly committed to, as we move forward, renewing not only vehicles, but small plant and equipment over to electric and or other hybrid type vehicles. So the commitment is there. as I say, the council have already committed to, you know, £1.6 million of infrastructure investment and many more millions down at the recycling centre in readiness for the electric infrastructure. So we don't want you to think that officers are trying to take an easy option of just continuing to buy fossil vehicles. Quite the contrary. Just for members to know, we have struggled to get electric buses, but we've got 2 now that are coming into the system, which we are delighted about. And only this week, I've also received delivery of a full electric powered new CCTV mobile enforcement vehicle. So just to reassure the committee, we're on this route now. We've got targets for 2030 that we need to meet, and we'll be endeavouring to achieve that for the council. Cost will become an issue at some point, but we'll address that as we move forward as part of the sort of medium-term financial planning, and we'll feed into that process with Hugh Jones in finance.
Okay, I'm going to allow Kevin to come in briefly, and then Nathan just as the proposer, and then we'll end the discussion on the item then.
Just quickly, that's all, Chair. Just to reiterate with Mike and Dave, some of the challenges is availability at this point of vehicles, especially specialist vehicles like gully suckers and your more specialist heavy goods. So, you know, where we look at, we're not just looking at electric, we're looking at hydrogen, looking at all options. I sit on the Welsh Fleet Managers group as well, so we try and, you know, network together to share each other's problems as well, and good practices when we look at transitioning over. And you know, and just one example is that, you know, refuse freighters are a real problem at the moment and are causing issues in other authorities for frontline service delivery. So, you know, whilst we are trying to transition over, we've got to understand the problems and work with the suppliers to try and remedy the problems as well. And then sometimes we may need to, like Dave has indicated, spot hire something in just to, you know, make sure that we secure the frontline services as well. All right. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Thanks. I'll bring in Councillor Nathan Goldup-John now. Nathan.
Firstly, really sorry for dropping in and out in this discussion. I've just had an absolute nightmare with this technology. Classic, isn't it? But from what I heard, it's very positive. And as Councillor Grimshaw alluded to, the hire of short-term hire, absolutely fine with that being delegated. I just wanted to clarify 2 points, and it might have been covered, so apologies if it has, but it's my fault because of the internet connection and everything else. It's just, firstly, how many other local authorities apply for the grant funding for the electric or hybrid vehicles, this transition fund? And then secondly, how likely is it that Welsh Government wouldn't provide that grant to Neath Talbot?
Okay, I don't know whether, was that Kevin? Do you want to come in on that one?
Yeah, I think it went out to all local authorities in Wales, and I think all the fleet managers and heads of service have put their next 3 year, I think it's 3 to 5 year programs into Welsh Government, so that they understand the needs of each local authority and what they've got coming up as well, especially for waste vehicles. So it's all been factored into Welsh Government for the next 3 to 5 years, I think.
Okay, you happy with that response, Nathan?
So just for clarity, it's quite likely that we will get that grant funding for this transition fund for hybrid and electrical vehicles.
Well, I think I would just add the opportunity to bid is for all councils. Obviously, we've got almost our entire recycling fleet. So Welsh Government have had all the information. from everybody, but I guess it depends ultimately the totality of the bids across Wales, and perhaps they might say to us, we could only support half of them this year or something, and then we'd have to look at, can we keep what we've got going into next year, the other diesels, until there's more money available. So, you know, we might have to talk to Welsh Government about that. I guess it does depend on the totality of the bids and the totality of the allocation within Welsh Government. So that I can't give you a definitive answer,
Okay.
Councillor.
Yeah, okay, no problem. So it's kind of more of a rolling fund, so to speak, over the next 3 years, where you might take one vehicle out and then replace one vehicle. So then the urgency of the long-term replacement of the vehicles isn't as pressing as this short-term hire then. So we could potentially push stuff off. And I did hear Dave earlier saying about hydrogen. So if that option became a bit more available later on, that might become more viable. Just so I'm clear, because I think in that case, the amendment would still just stand, because we do have a little bit of breathing space.
I can see officers nodding.
Yeah, that's right, Nathan. We'd have some flexibility, and
Okay.
obviously, as Mike said, if depends on the All Wales sort of cost for those vehicle renewals. If it means that we may have to slow the programme to capitalise and benefit from the grants, then that's what we'll need to do. But the downside of that is, as Mike mentioned, we might have to run on a diesel vehicle or a few diesel vehicles for another 12 months, for example. So obviously, as a council, we are going to be stretched on capital. We've only got a limited amount of capital available, and we will always want to take the grant wherever it's available. And perhaps just to mention, Chair, and I forgot to mention this earlier, we also had a contribution for the EV infrastructure investment for the charging facilities of about £400,000 of that 1.6 million that I mentioned from Welsh Government. And we have had a grant more recently, which was for EV charging to be put into one of our multi-storey car parks, which will be installed during the month of March now. And my colleagues in property will also be are working up a bid for further a submission to put further infrastructure in for EV charging in some of our car parks. So if that's successful, we'll obviously be implementing that as well. So it's twofold. We're making applications for the renewal of the vehicles, but it's also supported by a grant for EV infrastructure as well.
Okay, thanks for that extra information, Dave. So I'll just sum up before we go to the vote. I think there's been quite a lot of discussion over this item now. I think there's a few points I just want to reinforce. I said, and I think the key one is that, you know, the intention of this amendment is not to delay or frustrate the purchase of any vehicles that are necessary for service delivery whatsoever. I think the intention is to make sure there's a heightened level of scrutiny and checks and balances on any fossil fuel vehicles being purchased going forward. And I think, given the targets we've got and our plan and the climate emergency and everything else, I think that's quite a sensible step for us to take. And I think as members, it's a reasonable step for us to want to have a focused look, perhaps, where we are needing to purchase fossil fuel vehicles, to understand that justification and that background. So that's the intention of the amendment. And I'm quite satisfied that it is not going to have any undue consequences in that regard. But of course, that'll be a matter for the Cabinet members to consider later. So we've already had a proposer and a seconder, so we are very belatedly going to actually take the vote now. So I'm just going to ask my scrutiny officers to just help us go through the vote process. Thank you.
Yes, that's fine, Chair. Obviously, you've had a proposer and a seconder, so that amendment is still on the table. So if we can just go back to the abstentions. So if there's any abstentions, can I ask those that are a part of the scrutiny committee to put their hands up if there are any? I don't see any abstentions, Chair. Can I ask if anyone is against that amendment? If you could put your hand up. I don't see any, Chair. And just for the purpose, just to be clear, can I ask those who are for the amendment, can I ask you to put your hands up? Chair, I can confirm then that that amendment has been supported to Cabinet Board, as we've had the full support from the committee.
Okay, thank you for taking us through that, and thanks everyone for the very detailed discussion on that item as well. So I'm going to take us forward in the agenda now to agenda item 17, I think is our next one, which is the KPIs on pages 161 to 176. So I'm not aware of any indications on this item for questions from members, but what I can just see my cameras on in the chamber. I'm not sure what's going on there. There we go. Okay, so yeah, on agenda item 17, I haven't had any advanced questions from members on the KPIs, but I did want to just thank officers for taking on board our feedback and suggestions from previous committee meetings to change some of the KPIs for us. So I know committee members raised some questions and concerns and suggestions for amended or new KPIs, and some of those have been reflected in this report following some meetings from officers. But do we have any questions from members on item 17? I can see Laura's got one. Laura?
Thanks, Chair. It's just around a KPI we discussed previously to do with side waste. So we had a KPI for fly tipping to be investigated at the 3-day mark. And then we spoke about having maybe added one for side waste investigation and collection on the KPI as well. So I was just looking for an update on that.
Yeah, I just had a quick chat with the officers either side of me now. So some of the KPI suggestions we put forward are still sort of pending. So some of them have been reflected in this report. That's one of the ones that's been taken forward but hasn't been incorporated into the report. Yeah, I think officers are looking at how the data could be gathered and whether that's feasible as a KPI. Hope that's okay.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you very much.
Thanks. So if there are no further questions, this item is just for information. So therefore, we just note the report. So I'll now take members to agenda item. With me. Take members back to the scrutiny papers to agenda item 6, which is urgent items, and I can confirm I've got no urgent items. And then to agenda item 7, which is the forward work programme. Now, this item is just for noted unless members have any specific comments to make today. As usual, if there are any questions or queries.
Sorry, Chair, just for clarity, we would be going back to the Cabinet vote for item 21.
Yeah, we need to move into
right,
private first, that's all. Okay, so do members have any questions on the forward work programme before we move on? Can't see any there. So I'll now move on to agenda item 8, which is access to meetings. So in order to consider item 21, we need to move into private. So agenda item 8, access to meetings, resolved to exclude the public for the following items. Pursuant to section 100A, parts 4 and 5 of the Local Government Act and the relevant exempt paragraphs of part 4, schedule 12A to the above act. Can I please have a proposer and a seconder to move into private?
I propose, Chair.
Councillor Freegard and a seconder.
A second.
Councillor Williams, thank you. Do any members wish to abstain on the motion to go into private? And any members against either?
I don't see any for abstentions or against, Chair.
Okay, so could I just please ask for confirmation that any members of the public have been removed from the meeting and that the recording is now stopped?